Welcome to my channel, Olushola Live. My name is Olushola Taiwo. Thank you for tuning in to listen to part 3B of the reading of my cousin's book. Her name is Kehinde Adeola Ayeni, and we are reading from her book, Our Mothers Saw Expectations. It's a novel based on a lot of things that actually happened, and it's really, really very well written, and I'm so excited to continue reading it to you. So we read the first half of chapter 3 and we stopped at the top of page 60, and we're going to continue from page 60, second paragraph, and we'll finish chapter 3. So this is titled 3B. But if you've not tuned in before and you haven't heard about this book, it's amazing. It's written by Nigeria's first psychoanalyst. She's an amazing psychiatrist and novelist and mother and friend and cousin and so many other things. And if you are interested in purchasing the book, you can email her at kehindeayeni26@gmail.com. And regardless of where you are in the world, she will ship it to you. All right? Here's the proper spelling of her name. The first name, Kehinde, last name, Ayeni26@gmail.com. Thank you so much, and here we go. Chapter 3, Part B. Adewale invited several companies to bid for the construction of the schools, which had to be built in the northern region, and that was how he met Nkem. She came to represent her firm. Adewale told her if she would have dinner with him, the contract was theirs. She agreed on the spot. He did not make any money on the contract either, but started to date the beautiful Nkem. When Nkem's boss tried to thank him by giving him $2 million back, Adewale told him to spend all the money on what it was meant for, and that all he wanted was for him to remember that he did him this huge favor. Nkem's boss became eternally grateful to him. Nkem was ready to marry him soon after they started their relationship, but he suggested to her that they date for a year to be sure of their compatibility, and if all goes well, they would get married. Adewale, however, with all the contacts that he had been able to establish with his many friends locally and internationally, started to invest in many business ventures and thus started to build his wealth. Adewale had met Borg at Oxford in 1956 while they were both students. The latter was an heir to a banking empire in Sweden and was studying economics at the time. Adewale did not pay the tiny young man any attention for the first 3 months in Oxford, but Borg, the first time he met him, could not get the Negro out of his head. He had never met anyone who had the effect that Adewale had on him with his godlike good looks. The more he observed and found out about Adewale, the more enthralled he became of him. One Saturday evening, after a rowing match in which Adewale's team had won, people came over to congratulate him and his team. Borg was among the well-wishers, and the intensity of his stares at Adewale were not lost on him. He made a mental note to himself to find out more about the man whom he had seen around in their fraternity house. The following day, Adewale traveled down to London to spend the afternoon with his friends, eat the food, and dance to music from his home country, as he always did on Sundays. Upon returning to Oxford later that night, he noticed Borg staring at him again on the train, so he went over to him and introduced himself, and Borg stammered his name in return. Adewale sat next to him and chatted with him for the rest of the trip. He asked the Swede about himself, and Borg answered all of his questions eagerly. He in turn told him about his family and home, and the fact that he was a very brilliant man. As usual, he told Borg about his being failed by the English Board of Examiners twice because they could not believe that a man as brilliant as him could have come out of Africa. He brought out his wallet and showed the other man all the documentation about the issue. Borg invited him to lunch the following day, and Adewale accepted the invitation. When they arrived in Oxford, each man went his way. The following day, they had lunch together and they talked about their hopes and aspirations. Adewale told his new friend that he would become the president of his country, and Borg told him about the banking empire he was going to inherit. Their friendship continued until several weeks later when another Yoruba student at Oxford told Adewale to be very careful about Bjorg. He explained that the Swede liked men and that was why he was pursuing him. Adewale was amused. It was a proposition that he had received a few times since arriving in England. He realized that his charms had as much effect on men as on women. Yeah. He watched Bjorg closely after that and confirmed that he was indeed in love with him. He decided he would handle the situation the same way he handled the other men. He had calmly told each of them without making a big deal about it or humiliating them, "No, thank you. I prefer women." He would not alienate anyone or make unnecessary enemies because he believed in having as many people on his side as possible. You never know where and when you would need them was his philosophy. It took Bjorg months to tell Adewale what was on his mind. Adewale gently explained to him that he was not of that persuasion, but that he valued his friendship a great deal and would like for them to continue to be friends. Bjorg was devastated. He had thought Adewale liked him in return, as they had spent a great deal of time together. Adewale had even taken him to London to meet some of his friends from his home country. Adewale explained to him that he was his friend, and he had treated him as such, and introduced him to his other friends and culture. He told Bjorg that he could not force himself to be what he was not. He was sorry if he had led him on in any way that he was not aware of, but he had liked him as a friend and treated him as one. Later that night, Bjorg went to his flat, slit his wrists, and sat in the tub full of water. His next-door neighbor called the police when he could not fall asleep because of the sound of dripping water coming from his flat. When Adewale heard through some mutual friends that Bjorg tried to kill himself, he immediately went to see him in the hospital. Bjorg appreciated Adewale coming to see him. He had expected that he would not want to have anything to do with him again, but Adewale explained to him that he was his friend, and the issue should not stand in the way of their friendship. If Bjorg was willing to continue being friends with him, the Swede got better and was released from the hospital. He took a semester off and returned home to recuperate. While he was gone, he wrote to Adewale about once a fortnight, and Adewale replied all of his letters without any reference to what had happened. He returned to school the following semester, and they resumed their friendship, with neither of them referring to the event. Adewale did not tell a soul about it, and Bjorg was grateful to him for that. A year later, and 2 months before Adewale's graduation from his master's program, Bjorg called him on the phone in the middle of the night one Wednesday to ask him to come to his flat immediately, that he was in serious trouble. Adewale did not ask what the trouble was, but he quickly dressed and rode his bicycle as fast as he could, the 2 miles to his friend's flat. Bjorg met him at the door and asked him to park his bicycle in a block away. When he returned, Bjorg looked like a ghost and, shaking uncontrollably, led him to his bedroom. On the bed was a body of a man much older than him. Adewale turned to him with a questioning look. Bjorg explained to him that they had been seeing each other for a while. He was a 40-year-old married man and had come that evening, and while they were in bed, he just became a heavy weight on him. When he checked to see, he was dead. Adewale thought very fast. He realized that a word of what happened must not get out. Bjorg would be finished in Oxford. His family, unaware of his lifestyle, would be devastated and might disown him. He might be pushed to attempt to kill himself again, but at the same time, he did not want to get mixed up in some white people's trouble. He was a black man, and the police, who were known to be unnecessarily cruel to African students, could pin the death on him one way or the other. He had just 2 months to go, and he would have his master's degree in his hand. He could bid the cold country goodbye and go home, but one look at the shaking Bjorg, and he knew he could not abandon his friend. On Adewale's instruction, they dressed the dead man in his clothes, making sure that all of his belongings were on him and nothing of his was in the flat. They wiped all surfaces clean of his fingerprints, including the stove, the refrigerator, and the doorknobs, and as quiet as he could, so as not to wake up Bjorg's neighbor with the sensitive ears. Adewale carried the body outside of the flat, leaned it against the wall, and fled. He had instructed Borg to return to his room and then, some 30 minutes later, to come down, open the front door of his flat. The body would fall down when he opened the door, and that he should scream on the top of his lungs as if the man just keeled over and died on his doorstep after he pressed his bell for help. Bjork, though still shaking, followed Adewale's instructions almost to the minute. The police came and took the body away. Bjork was questioned many times during the week, and when the coroner's report came back that the man died of a heart attack, the police dismissed him, and the man's widow came to thank him for calling the police for her husband. The Swede became eternally grateful to Adewale and bid him a tearful goodbye when he left England. They maintained contact with one another over the years and followed the progress of each other's careers. Bjork married a woman from another banking family in 1966 and started to have children right away. He became the president of his father's bank in 1970 following the older Borg's death. In 1971, he invited Adewale to buy some stocks in his bank, and Adewale sent all the money he had saved up. Within a year, there was a 100% return on his investment. Thus, he started to build his wealth, independent of his country's government, through his friend who continued to invest his money for him. Moji was not happy when she found out that Adewale was seriously dating another woman. She started to call him on a regular basis with complaints and demands. 6 months after her child was born, she wanted him to get her pregnant again so she could have a second child. Adewale, who felt overwhelmed with his duties in the army, his new relationship with Nkem, and his business dealings, which were making him wealthier by the minute, felt irritated by Moji's constant tantrums. He believed that it was too risky to continue the relationship with her, especially after trying to get her pregnant again. He did not know how to arrange for that to happen. Also, he felt that Rahim had been very good to him. Even though he had not promoted him to the rank of brigadier general, as he was promised, he did receive 2 substantial contracts, and he was in a lot of senior officers' good grace. He did not want to spoil things, but Moji would not leave him alone. She reminded him that it was the promise he made to her. She told him that she would like to have 2 more children and be done with childbearing as soon as possible. She suggested several ways for them to get together, most of which would involve them traveling abroad for the rendezvous, that they would time it to be around the time of her ovulation, and that she was sure that she would get pregnant right away. 6 months later, Adewale gave in to her demands as they traveled to England separately. They met in a small hotel outside of London and spent the weekend together. He returned home 4 days later, while she remained in London for another week. 2 weeks later, she missed her period. Rahim was very pleased with his wife becoming pregnant, and once again, he invited Adewale to his home outside of Zuru to discuss another business proposition. When Adewale arrived there, he was surprised to find out that there were 4 other generals present. They were all Hausa or Fulani. Rahim introduced him to the men and explained to him that he had been invited to join them because of the trust he had developed in him. He told him that his giving him Moji to marry had been the best thing anyone ever did for him. She had given him a lot of pleasure, and that he loved her more than he could have ever hoped of loving any woman. Rahim and the other generals were planning a coup to overthrow the current president, and they wanted Adewale to be the coordinator in the southwest corner of the country. They explained to him that they did not want a bloody coup, wanting everything to be as peaceful as possible. If he were able to assist them and take care of his corner of the country, his reward would be that he would become the Governor General of Western Region. None of them needed to be told what would become of them if the coup failed. Adewale, unable to believe this honor bestowed on him by this group of men, the most powerful in the country, promised them that he would do his best to make the coup succeed. They spent the rest of the weekend working out the details and the strategies that would be used. Adewale contributed a lot of ideas, and suggestions, and they listened to him, respecting his intelligence and expertise. He felt that they should invite an Igbo general to take care of the eastern part of the country, someone who had been on the side of the republic that tried to secede during the Civil War. Igbo people would be more loyal to a person like that more than they would be to the Hausa general who had the highest position in the eastern region of the country at the time, or to the other Igbo generals in the army, most of whom had either fought against the republic or had been neutral. He explained to them that even though there was a dictatorship in the country and the civilians did not have a say in who their leaders were, if the citizens got officers they liked, they would be more cooperative. They explored possibilities, and Adewale suggested General Ike. Rahim's face clouded as if he had seen a ghost when Adewale mentioned Ike's name. He stared at him, unable to speak for minutes. Adewale was well aware of the history between Rahim and Ike. He knew that General Ike was not liked by a lot of people. He was very difficult to get along with and could be cruel if cruelty was called for, but he was a good strategist. For the coup to have any chance of success, they needed him on their side. At the time of the Civil War, he had fought for the eastern region, and heroically too, and Igbo people loved him very much for that. They felt that he was one of them because he lost his family to the war. He was still in the nation's army because at the end of the war, the government proposed reconciliation with the policy of no conqueror, no vanquished. And many officers in the Republic's army were invited to join the nation's army. General Ike agreed to join, though he still harbored resentment against the current president of the country. He believed in less central control and more autonomy for the individual regions. Because of this, Adewale knew that he would join them and that he should be rewarded with the governorship of the eastern region after the coup, with promises made to him of more autonomy for his people. Rahim continued to stare at Adewale, still unable to speak. Autonomy for the Igbos had been the very reason they tried to secede. It would be as if they were being given what they wanted all along on a platter of gold. He wondered if perhaps he had misjudged Adewale's intelligence and loyalty. The bulk of the wealth of the country was mined from the eastern region and southern regions. If they had autonomy, where would that leave the northern region that had nothing? With no natural resources to speak of, or human resources for that matter. Also, he and Ike had a history, and he assumed that Adewale knew that there was a personal conflict between them. He had had his wife killed to break his spirit during the war. Another problem that he anticipated was about telling him. They run the risk of him blabbing his mouth off, which could mean death penalty for them. A particular thing about Ike was that even though he was difficult, he was not a corrupt man. They knew that they could not pay him off with money or promises of contracts like a lot of military officers could be bought off. They did not know his price. Adewale asked the men at the meeting to give him some time to think about a way to deal with General Ike. He firmly believed that every man has a price. The question is, what is Ike's price? Why has he not remarried was another question on Adewale's mind. He felt that the answer to the man's price laid in his reason for remaining single, because he was obviously an eligible man. He was not wealthy by most general standards, but he was a wealthy man by an average standard. Rahim did not think Ike should be invited, and Adewale explained to his mentor that sometimes you need to eat with the devil to get what you want. Ike will deliver the eastern region of the country to us, and peacefully too. All that we need to do is make promises to him. We don't have to fulfill the promises, or at the most fulfill some and rescind others. Once you become the president, you will be the one making all the decisions. But first, you have to become the president of the country, and you need Ike on your side. Other things could follow later. The other generals agreed with Adewale They appealed to Rahim to give the idea some thought. They asked Adewale to take his time to think things through. They gave each other the assignments of thinking of other officers from the eastern region that they could use for the purpose until they reconvene in 2 weeks. Adewale took his assignment very seriously and researched into General Ike in as much detail as he could. He contacted a colleague and friend of his who was the head of the National Security Department, asked for a copy of Ike's personal file, and studied it thoroughly. General Ike is a man of outstanding integrity, a good soldier, and a very proud man, he read. He had married a woman who was some 10 years younger than him and had loved her a lot. They did not have children, and in spite of that remained married to her, even though there was pressure from members of his family that he married another woman who could bear children. He had firmly believed in his people seceding from the rest of the country and had worked closely with a lot of army officers from his region on that during the war, and once they lost the war, he swallowed his pride and committed to serving the nation as best as he could. During the war, his heroism had been unequaled, as well as his talent as a good soldier. His wife was killed as a way of demoralizing him at the time, because that was the only thing that could touch him. Rahim, as the commanding officer on the federal end, arranged for this to be done. If the Republic Army had 2 generals like him, they would have successfully seceded. His wife's death killed a lot of his spirit and zeal. It so demoralized him that he started to make mistakes, and his cantonment, which had been one of the toughest to crack, was captured within a month after he was informed of her death. He had not been able to forgive himself for that. There was a picture of the woman in the personnel file Adewale was studying, and he caught his breath because she looked exactly like Nkem. They could have been identical twin sisters. They both had very light complexion. Both were about the same height of 5 feet 6 inches, with the same thick black long hair and some lovely shaped eyes and lips which curled up at the corner of the mouth like they were perpetually smiling. Ike was a man of outstanding integrity, he read in many places in the file, not corruptible. And his cruelty recorded in the file had to do with the way he tortured war prisoners during the war. A lot of gory details were in the file. He was not tried after the war for these crimes because he did not do them to civilians, and he claimed that he did them to get information on the enemy. All is fair in war had been the conclusion of the investigating panel, and he had been admitted into the army with his promotions coming on merit and time. He is a man you have to respect, even though you might not like him, Adewale concluded, and speculated that perhaps losing his wife brought out his evil side. There had not been any report of cruelty done to people by him since the end of the war, but his reputation had preceded and followed him everywhere his name was mentioned as a tough taskmaster who demanded excellence from his subordinates. Adewale finished reading the file, and he smiled to himself, for he knew Ike's price. It would have to be Nkem. He scheduled an appointment to meet with the general under a pretense of asking for his assistance in dealing with some problems he was having with his job as liaison officer between the military and the civilians. And since General Ike was a commanding officer of the eastern quarter of the country, perhaps he might have some suggestions for him, he said to the older man when they spoke on the phone. Ike invited him to his home the following weekend. Adewale took Nkem with him and traveled to Enugu to meet with the general. When the older man opened the door for them and saw Nkem, he stopped in his tracks. It was as if he saw a ghost. His hand trembled when he offered it to Adewale to shake hands with him, and he stammered. He took them into his living room, and he left the room to compose himself. When he returned, his eyes were red. Adewale could not believe his good luck, that Nkem just happened to look like the general's deceased wife, whom he had loved so much. Ike offered them drinks, and one of his servants was called in to serve them. Ike could not take his eyes off Nkem. He stared directly at her, making her so uncomfortable that she started to squirm nervously in her seat. Adewale broke the tense silence by complimenting him on the beauty of his house. Ike did not answer him, but he stood up and disappeared for another 10 minutes. He returned, and when Adewale searched his face, it was clear he had gone away to compose himself. He could not understand how a man could have how a woman could have such a powerful hold on a man, especially one as brave as Ike. The love he had for his deceased wife was his Achilles heel, then and will be now. If he fell for that woman that hard, he will fall for her look-alike again, Adewale assured himself. When Ike returned the second time, he started to talk to Nkem. He asked her about her job. He was impressed that she was an architect. He wanted to know which part of Igbo land she was from, who were her parents, and on he continued to question her. Nkem gracefully answered all his questions, and after a while they started to speak in Igbo, both of them not caring that Adewale, who did not speak the language, was sitting there with them. Adewale was not offended. He told himself that the fact that they found common ground was to his advantage. They talked for about 20 minutes, and periodically Ike would look at Adewale, apologize for his bad manners in speaking a language that his guests did not understand, only for him to turn back to Nkem, continue his conversation in Igbo. Very soon, they were laughing like old friends. Adewale excused himself and told the two of them he would go walk in the general's beautiful garden, and they seemed happy to see him leave. He was called in half an hour later by one of the servants, who informed him that dinner was served. He returned and joined Nkem and Ike in the dining room. The older man apologized again for his bad manners. He told Adewale that he had not met such a delightful young woman like Nkem in a long time, and that it was refreshing. After dinner, they had drinks with him and left his house an hour later. Ike and Adewale did not discuss a thing. The following Monday, while Adewale was in his office, Ike walked in unannounced and apologized for the intrusion. He also apologized again for his actions when Adewale visited him. The man is full of apologies, Adewale said to himself, a sign of weakness as far as he was concerned. Ike wanted to know what the relationship was between him and Nkem. Adewale told him she was his fiancée and that they planned to get married before the year was out. Ike said he loved the young woman, that it was like love at first sight for him. It was like he had known her in a previous life, and that Nkem felt the same way about him. He told Adewale that he spoke with her about it already, but she was afraid of Adewale's reaction if she broke off the relationship with him, since she had promised to marry him. Ike felt that he would be a better husband for her because they had a lot in common, since they were both Igbos with the same language and culture. Will you be able to find it in your heart to forgive me for taking your fiancé? He asked Adewale. I, as a superior officer, should know better than to behave in such a manner, but I am not trying to abuse my seniority. It is a matter of the heart, and the heart doesn't care for such things. If you will not hold this against me, I will forever be in your debt. This was the invitation Adewale had been waiting for. He could not believe his good luck. The man was the one begging him instead of the other way round. He looked somber and sat down heavily, as if his heart was broken. He was quiet for a long time, and Ike continued to apologize. Finally, he said to Ike, if Nkem feels the same way that you feel about her, there is nothing that I can do about that. I cannot force a woman to love me if she loves another. I give you both my blessing. But there is a very sensitive matter that I would like to discuss with you, and that had been the reason for my visit to Enugu in the first place. Ike apologized again that they did not get to the matter after he took the time to travel that far to Enugu. He was willing to hear him and offer his assistance. It was the least he could do, he concluded. Adewale asked him to come on a walk with him, and the two of them left the office and walked on the fields around the office buildings. He stressed his need for Ike's help. If you're able to do this for me, I will not hold the fact that you're taking the woman that I love against that you're taking the woman that I love against you, but rather I will forever be indebted to you. He continued, Sir, what I'm about to discuss with you could potentially kill both of us. And once you have heard it, you will not have any other choice but to go along with us. Do you want to hear what I have to say? Ike nodded at Adewale and said to him, Colonel, I am ready and willing to hear what you have to tell me. I am in with you. I am willing to take the risks involved. Adewale, who had never loved a woman in his life, could not comprehend that a man could love a woman enough to risk his life. It was all totally new to him, and he marveled at the fact that such an emotion existed. He knew Ike was no fool, neither was Rahim, but both of them had given their all because of women. He told Ike about the intended coup, stressing to him that he would have to go along with them since he had told him about it. He told him that there were some other generals involved and that they asked him to invite him to join them. If the word of the coup got out or something were to happen to him, Ike was as good as dead too. He did not tell him the names of the generals involved. General, you stand to gain a lot by joining us and capturing the eastern quarter of the country for us. For one thing, there will be more autonomy for your people under the new regime. The eastern region will be able to keep most of the revenue from the oil that is drilled from your land, but which is being used to develop the rest of the country, while the land that gives us the wealth suffers. Sir, there will be a lot of advantages for you in that you will be able to get your revenge on the current president who waged war against your people and whose administration had your beloved wife killed. When Adewale said this, Ike's eyes welled up with tears and he looked away for some moment. He looked back at Adewale and, clasping him on the shoulder, remarked at what an incredible young man he was. I have heard a lot of great things said about you over the years, even though I never met you until Saturday when you were a guest in my house. I have heard all of your accomplishments and that you are a genius, and my interactions with you in the past 2 days have borne everything out to be as accurate as people have said of you. Your father must be a very proud man. You made the rank of a colonel before you were 40 years old, and now you are offering to me that which will give me and my people back our pride and our voice. I am speechless, Colonel, and I don't know the people who asked you to invite me to join all of you, but if you are associated with them, they must be good people too. Tell them I am in with them, and I will secure the East for them. He looked as if he were about to cry or hug him, and Adewale calmly waited until he was finished. I have been asked to offer you the governorship of the Eastern region if you agree to go with us. He told Ike, whose response was to grasp his hand again. I accept, and I am forever in your debt. You are a great man, and you shall surely come to great things. I will see to it as much as is within my power. I promised him. Ikem called Adewale later in the day to talk about their relationship, and he let her off the hook right away by telling her that he held nothing against her. If she loved the general, there was nothing he could do to stop them. He gives both of them his blessing, and if she ever needed anything from him, he would be glad to do it for her. She started to cry. You are incredible, Adewale, she sobbed. I love you. God knows that I love you, but I have been afraid of my father's reaction if I took you home. He had always told me that he would kill me if I brought home an Ngbati Yoruba husband. I love Ike as well, and I don't know that it's possible to love two men, but I do. It will be easier for me if I married Ike since we are both Igbo. She sobbed for a while and Adewale let her. He told himself that she did not love him, that she had loved his status in the society and his bright future in the army. But what continued to puzzle him was the fact that the two generals seemed genuinely to love these women. Rahim practically worshipped Boji and the 1-year-old Amina. He showed the infant's picture to people all the time, and whenever he spoke about her and her milestone accomplishments, he would be beaming with pride, and there would be tears at the corners of his eyes. These were strange emotions to him, and some part of him began to wonder that perhaps he did not have it at all, as he had always thought of himself. He raked up more sympathy from his close friends when they heard that he had lost yet another woman to a more powerful general. They said that these men were abusing their positions and that he was the victim. He did not tell them otherwise. The coup plotters reconvened 2 weeks later to conclude their plans. Adewale told them the good news that Ike was in. The older men knew that it had cost him his girlfriend, and they admired his ability to pay any price for what he wanted. He was awarded yet another contract to build another road in another part of the country as compensation for giving up his girlfriend. They assured him that he was still very young and he had time to find other women. Ike was called in the following day after Adewale told the generals in details of the meeting he had with him, and they were convinced that he was on their side. They formulated their plan as to the takeover. There were 7 of them to head and coordinate everything in the different parts of the country. They would take over the radio and television stations in their respective parts of the country. They would also take over the ammunition depots in their different sections and be the commanding officers. All the different commanding officers of the sensitive military posts in the different sections of the country would be arrested at 1 o'clock in the morning on the day of the coup on one charge or the other, as well as all the federal commissioners and the regional governors. The warrants for the arrests would come from the office of the president. Rahim told them that he had already taken care of the warrants. These would be given to the several officers under their command with the instructions to arrest these men at exactly the same time. The orders were not to be given to them too early. He warned his accomplice to avoid them communicating with one another, and it would be made to look as if individual officers were being arrested, but not all of them. They would be imprisoned and dealt with later. Rahim would personally take the current president into custody since he would become the president on completion of the coup. The president would not suspect a thing since they were very close friends, and the night they planned to strike would be on Saturday. He would be in the presidential palace anyway, as he had been invited to dine with the president and his family since his family was out of the country. Muji and Amina were away in Japan with her parents. They left 2 days before, while his other wives were with their children, all of whom were in schools in the United States of America. Rahim advised all the men to ship their wives and children out of the country as well and make sure that they would be financially secure in the very small chance that the coup failed. The coup was to be as peaceful as possible and they should try to avoid bloodshed, he insisted. The men were excited as they made the plans. It was as if they were back on the battlefields with their spirits high as they reassured each other of success. They reviewed what could go wrong and how to avoid these from happening. By the end of the week, each of the 7 men knew what he was supposed to do, and they parted after they set the time of the strike to the Saturday, 6 days away. Adewale returned to Ibadan, withdrew $50,000 in local currency from his bank, and traveled to Igbo-Elere. He gave the money to his mother and asked her to keep it in a safe place for herself and her mother-in-law. He told her that the government was sending him on a mission and that he might be gone for a long time. The money should tide them over difficult times in case it took longer than he anticipated. He also gave her passbooks to several savings accounts, which he opened in her name with different banks. He told her that she could withdraw money from them if need be. His mother started to cry because these were incredibly large amounts of money to her, and she wondered if her son knew that he would die. He reassured her that he would be fine and that he was just taking precautions. He knew that he had to do this to ensure that they would be financially secure for a long time should the coup fail, because failure of the coup would mean death, or at least life imprisonment for him. He, unlike the other men planning the coup, could not send his mother and grandmother to England or the USA. They would not go, as these were foreign lands to them, and it would alarm them. Adewale's mother ran to her mother-in-law and told her about the huge amount of money and the bank accounts that contained even huger amounts of money. She was worried, she said, and asked the older woman to speak with her grandson and discourage him from going on this obviously dangerous government mission. Adewale's mother intuitively knew that something was not right. She understood her son very well. She wondered if he stole the money and needed somewhere to hide it. She was aware of his ambition and his determination to get whatever he set his mind on, and how he would stop at nothing in order to do so. Even though a lot of her friends had always envied her because of him, and she was very proud of his brilliance and hard work, she knew that he had a cold heart, just like his father. She did not know her dead husband's real secret and the reason why they moved to Ibueleri, except for the story that they told the town. But after living with the man for many years in marriage, she knew deep down in her heart that there was more to it. She had always prayed for her son that God would help him develop compassion for other human beings. When she told Adewale's grandmother about her concerns, the elderly woman started to cry as well. Wow. She too knew something was not right, and she wondered if the curse on her husband's family would continue to run through all generations. She thought of her own husband, who went crazy and killed the king and a lot of elders of their old home, and of how her now deceased son had continued his father's behavior and repaid good with evil in the way he treated the good people of their new home when he became the white man's servant spying on his own people. She decided that the time had come to let the secret out. Adewale should be told of his grandfather's shameful behavior so he would know how to behave himself. She asked her daughter-in-law to call her grandson for her, and when she arrived, she told him she had some things to tell him. Adewale's mother started to leave the two of them, but the older woman asked her to stay and hear what she had to say as well. Excuse me. You have a right to know who we really are, she told her daughter-in-law. You have been a part of this family far too long, and we have done you a great disservice by not telling you our secret. We are not honorable people. Otherwise, we would have told you when you married us. It would have helped you in raising Adewale. Although in spite of your ignorance, you did a great job. You raised a worthy son, and I pray every day that he becomes the man he is capable of becoming. Adewale and his mother stared at the old woman without saying a word. He was impatient to get going because he still had a lot to do before the coup on Saturday. His grandmother noticed his impatience and, giving him a dirty look, told him that he had to stay and hear her out. She told him about how his great-grandfather defied the tradition and the king of their original home ran away rather than be castrated and become a eunuch. How he was enslaved, got married, had children, escaped with his family, and returned home some 8 years later. And how upon his return, his family for generations to come was demoted from the esteemed position of the head eunuch to the lowly position of the servant who dressed the king. She told him of how his grandfather inherited the position of the servant who dressed the king from his own father and how he hated the job. She described to Adewale his grandfather's envy and burning ambition to become king at all costs, even though it was impossible at the time, and how he harbored hatred and resentment in his heart for 40 years. He was a miserable man who made life difficult for all around him, she said. The intensity of his bitterness had been so palpable that 5 years into the marriage with him, and after she had given birth to Adewale's father, she vowed never to have another child by him. She did not want the poison passed down to more of her offspring. I wanted to leave him because he would also beat me and abuse me in every way you could imagine. But my father forbade me to leave him. I went to a witch woman out of desperation, and she gave me some potions to use to seal my womb, so I wouldn't have any more children for him. I resigned myself to a life of having only one child, even though all around me, my mates were having 6 and 7 and 8 children. That was how terrible a person he was. She paused for a while. He finally did what I had been afraid he might do for years. When he took a machete and went to the palace and killed the good king and all the people who were around him, he was blinded by hatred. I had lived many years and still find it I have lived many years and still find it unbelievable that one could hate as much as he did. That was all that occupied his heart, hatred. He had to run around under the cover of darkness. Let me repeat that. We had to run under the cover of darkness. Your father and I. We traveled by foot for weeks, walking at night in case they had sent people to look for us. I paid a big price for being the wife of the fool, as I never saw my brothers, sisters, parents, or friends after that. God sent the people of this town to me. He gave me your mother as a daughter, and a woman couldn't have asked for better. She paused again and gave Adewale an intense look. She continued, your father did exactly what his father before him did. He spied on his own people for the white man. He disgraced himself. I thank God I didn't have more children for his father. You are now a man, Adewale, and God, in his infinite mercy, has blessed you with what every man desires. Talent in abundance, good looks, sporting abilities, charm, and money. You have been given priceless gifts, Adewale, and I don't know why God did that. One of the gifts he has given you would make another man great, but he gave you countless numbers of them. You have to be worthy of them, and all you have to do is be accountable. That is the curse that comes with gifts, accountability. Don't follow your father and his father's footsteps. Carve a path for yourself to greatness. That is all I have to say. His grandmother concluded her story. Adewale and his mother were quiet for a long time after she finished. Adewale stood up from the low stool on which he had been sitting in his grandmother's room, prostrated in a sign of respect before the old woman, thanked her for her advice, and took his leave. His mother walked out with him, hugged him to her, and started to cry. Impatiently, he reassured her that he would be fine and that he would see her in about a month. She did not want him to leave, and she brought up a well-beaten conversation that always deteriorated into an argument. The issue of him finding a wife and giving her grandchildren. My back is crying for a grandchild to carry and show the world. If it is difficult for you to find a wife because you are very busy, I will find a good girl for you, she pleaded with him yet again. Adewale, with mounting irritation, hugged her and, instructing her to keep the money in a safe place and not to tell people about it so that they don't rob her, drove away. He thought briefly about his grandfather and his stupidity in assassinating a sitting king. It also confirmed for him what he had always known, and that is, the citizens of his country, born before the 20th century, were idiots, the whole lot of them. That is why they allowed themselves to be colonized in the first place. And my grandfather is a good example. If you are planning a coup, at least use some common sense and understand what you were up against, he concluded. He also wondered why his grandmother was telling him the story at this time. Some fears that the coup might not succeed flashed through his mind, but he dismissed them immediately. It is just the woman's sense of timing, he told him. He decided. She has always had great timing, as far back as I have known her. She had always seemed to know when he would do something he was not supposed to be doing all of his life. She had been like a witch. He remembered her always creeping up behind him at different times and telling him not to do the things he was about to do, even benign things ranging from throwing rocks at lizards, which crawled on the walls as targets, a game he and his friends played all the time, to the time at the age of 14 years when he was ready to have his first sexual encounter. He had been courting the girl, who was 16 years old at the time, for a long time. He had been giving her money and other gifts, and finally she agreed to sleep with him. The day it was to happen, his grandmother came up to him and out of the blue told him that she would like to say something to him that would stand him in good stead for the rest of his life. All he wanted on that day was to get laid. He did not care about the rest of his life. He had impatiently asked her what it was, and she had said to him, "Don't start a sexual life just yet. You are still too young. It is not good for a man to start having sex too early in his life. It will become like a disease to him, and that is all he will think about. He will become a slave to women, and he will not be able to make any good of himself. Women are luckier in that regard," she had continued. "If a girl starts to have sex too early in life, the worst that will happen to her is that she will become pregnant. But not so for a man. He will not be able to focus on anything else except sex. I hope you heard all that I'm telling you," she had concluded that day, and he had been too surprised to close his mouth after she was done. He could not make himself go to meet the girl where they had planned to have sex on that day. He had been too scared. He wanted to have a lot of other focus in his life except women. He did not have sex until 2 years later. He shook his head in disbelief at that memory and reassured himself, "I am just being superstitious. She just has a great sense of timing. She has always had a great sense of timing. I have a coup to plan, and like my great-grandfather, I will do everything in my power to make the coup succeed. I will not allow anyone steal my manhood from me." He took his right hand off the steering wheel of his car and saluted the man. And unlike my grandfather and my stupid father, who was a white man's dog, I will not fail. I will carve a path for myself, all right? I will not follow the footsteps of those two before me. The coup will succeed, he said emphatically to himself. The coup in the early hours of the morning that Sunday in 1974 was a success. When the country awoke, they found that their government had changed while they slept without their consent. Reactions varied. Some people were excited and hoped that it might mean that conditions would be better under the new administration, that there would be less corruption and their needs would be taken into consideration. Others were hopeful that they would be related in one way or the other to the new power brokers, so that they would have the opportunity to become rich and be able to have a share of the national cake. Yet others resigned themselves to the state of affairs being the same. One set of dictators was just replacing another set. They were playing musical chairs. Nothing would change. For the bulk of the people, however, especially those in the rural areas, they were not even aware of the change in their government. Adewale's mother and grandmother belonged to the last category. The president was killed in the takeover, as were a lot of his close friends and associates, and 2 of the regional governors. 2 kings cannot live in a kingdom, was Rahim's belief, even though he had told his fellow coup plotters that bloodshed should be avoided as much as possible. He did not give his friend, the president, a chance, because he just walked into his bedroom that early morning at 1 o'clock and shot him in the head. On appointing himself as the new president of the country, Rahim addressed the nation at 1:30 in the morning as planned, and again at 8 o'clock when he was sure that most of the citizens were awake. Television and radio programs were suspended for 3 days, and all that was broadcasted were his address, which played over and over, and martial music was on at other times. Adewale completed his assignment without a drop of bloodshed in his quarter of the country. Everything went as smoothly as possible, and so did General Ike in his quarter of the country. Ike became the governor of the eastern region as he had been promised, but Adewale was not appointed governor of the western region as he had been promised. Muji returned 3 days after the coup, when the borders into the country, which had been closed, were reopened, and she was crowned First Lady. She was about 4 months pregnant at the time and had never looked lovelier as she stepped down from the plane with the almost 16-month-old Amina in her arms. She waved to the cheering crowd and the photographers who were falling all over themselves to catch the best shot of her. The citizens loved her even more. The Yoruba people reassured themselves that they had a good representation in government since the First Lady was a Yoruba woman, and it was an open secret that Rahim loved his wife, as he was unable to take his eyes off of her in public. The new military government, headed by Rahim, even felt that they should explain the reason for the coup to the citizens, lied that they had come into power in a counter coup to another bunch of coup plotters who killed the president and all the officials who died early that morning. They went into details about the alleged coup plotters, all of whom they were now dead, that they had been younger officers with the ranks of lieutenant and majors, and they supplied names and pictures. Not one of them was known by anyone. The assassinated president was given a state burial 4 days later, and Rahim wept as he stood next to his friend's casket. He kept assuring his widow and children and the few citizens who cared that justice be served that the assassins had been killed. And so the people of this country accepted their new government in resignation, as had been the case since the British came, joined several nations together, made it one country, and made themselves the rulers. And here ends chapter 3, part B. The next time I read, it will be chapter 4, and it will start on page 82. Thank you again for tuning in. Thank you for listening. If you like anything you heard, please share it with your friends. Facebook, Instagram, you can tweet about it. You can comment on the video. You can tell me what you like about it, what you would like to see more things you'd like read. And also buy the book. It's really, really good. It's a great read. I reread it this past weekend. I stayed up straight for 10 hours. I was just so enthralled. In fact, I didn't go to bed until 4:45 a.m. on Saturday morning because I was rereading the book. I really, really like it that much. And you can buy a copy by emailing my cousin, Kehinde Ayeni. Here is the spelling of her name. Her first name, Kehinde. Her last name, Ayeni. Number 26. So Kehinde Ayeni 26 @gmail.com. Thank you, and bye for now. Ciao.